Well, good morning, Westside family. I'm one of the pastors here. My name is Rob, and as Jason said earlier in the service, we're in this journey through the book of Acts, and right now we're looking at more specifically seeing Jesus. And the straight up truth is there's a lot of things that blur our vision, that cause a diffused focus. And so we're trying to learn together by going back to the old story of the early church. How is it that we can bring clarity to our vision so we can see Jesus? And Dan started last week. He kicked off the series with a phenomenal message. And he told his story of his eyesight and his LASIK surgery. So I thought I'd tell you about my journey with my eyesight and why I wear glasses. When I was about 12 years old, I started having a difficulty seeing the board in the classroom, and I told my mom, and she said, well, it looks like you're gonna have to get glasses. And I was really excited about this because, I was in that wonderful time called puberty, and I already had pimples and stinky armpits, and my voice was changing, and I thought, yes, the only way to increase this awkward experience is by adding glasses. I'm just so grateful I get to wear glasses. And my mom, this is true, she knew a guy who made glasses in his basement. I don't know, these are like black market mafia glasses. And you could get them cheap, but there wasn't a big selection. It was a pretty small selection. So I picked the best ones, but even the best ones were horrible. Here's a picture of me at 12 years old with my new glasses. It's horrible. Now, you might recognize that those glasses are remarkably similar to a very famous icon. Yeah, side-by-side comparison. Let's see it. We're wearing the same glasses. It's just wrong. So guess what? I ended up putting those glasses at the bottom of my sock drawer, and I absolutely refused to wear them. I wouldn't wear them. And Mom would yell at me, and I was like, I don't care. Ground me. I'm not wearing the glasses. Go for it. And that went on for years and years until my first year of college, and I finally surrendered. And you want to know why I surrendered to getting glasses? Because I was having splitting headaches. It was from the eye strain. And when I went in to see the doctor, he was like, he did all the checkups, and then he had that little eye exam thing on his wall, and he said, you should have had glasses a long time ago. And I was like, oh, really? Huh. Who would have known? So I started wearing glasses. And you know what? This is true of us. We'll settle for a diffused view of Jesus, often until life does what? Gives us a headache. When we lose the job or when the relationship blows up, our integrity gets shattered and there's all these consequences and pieces on the ground. And you know what? If it takes a headache to clear up our vision to see Jesus, it's worth it. Because all of life comes down to one thing, that's knowing Jesus and making him known. So if it takes a headache to get us to clear up our vision to see Jesus more in 2020, he's worth it. And we need it. But what we're celebrating in this series is, guess what? You don't have to wait for life to give you a headache to see Jesus more clearly. And that's good news. In fact, pull out your notes and write this down. Here's the big idea for the whole series. We can learn to see Jesus in the everyday. We don't have to wait for life to give us a headache. And in this series, we're looking at the different lenses the early church looked through that helped them see Jesus in a breathtaking and transformative way. There was these different lenses that clicked into place and allowed them to see Jesus in 1080, in Technicolor. And it led to transformation in them and through them and beyond them. And these lenses clicked in place. And it's, when you go to the optometrist and you do the eye test, you sit down and you sit in front of that contraption, right? And they'll ask you, is this better? Click, click, or is this better? Click, click. Right? Is this better? Click, click, or is this better? Click, click. Is this better? Click, click, or is this better? And if you're like me, you start like, I don't want to fail the test. I don't know. Just tell me what's the right answer. Which is better? And if you're like me, you can just relax right now. Because this isn't a test. These lenses are very clearly described in Acts chapter 2. And we're just going to let them week after week click into place so we can see Jesus more clearly. So let's look again at Acts chapter 2. There in your notes, we'll start with a little review from last week. It says this: a deep sense of awe came over them all. And the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. Circle the word wonders. And lens number one is this: we can learn to see Jesus in wonder. And Dan talked about this last week. That wonder is a posture of the soul. Instead of seeing life through cynicism or entitlement, we recognize that everything's a gift. And children have this sense of orientation. You know, it's part of the innocence of childhood, this sense of wonder, of discovering things all the time. My youngest daughter, Belle, in her class right now, they've been studying the different types of rocks. And wherever we go, she'll say, "Dad, check it out. That's a sedimentary rock." You know, we were outside of Chili's last week, and she stopped. She said, "Dad, check out these rocks." And she literally pulled me down, and we sat down outside of Chili's, and she's showing me all the different rocks. And you know what? They were absolutely beautiful. And there's this posture we can have, and Dan talked about it last week. We start out by saying, "Jesus, wow me. Help me not to take it for granted. Jesus, surprise me. Jesus, speak to me." And then Jesus, change me. And I hope you've been experimenting with looking through that lens this week. But here's the next one. Let's look at it. What the passage says next is this: "And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need." Circle the word need. So lens number 2 is this: we can learn to see Jesus in need. And what this week's lens looks like, and you can write this down. You'll see a little box in your notes where you can write and draw. I want you just to put a triangle in there. This is what this week's lens looks like. And I just want to put a pause button on that. Let it just hang in the background of your mind and your attention. We'll come back to it. But learning to see Jesus through need is like a triangle. And what we see here is something very revolutionary. Again, notice what it says, that they shared everything they had to the point that they literally sold their property and possessions to care for blood relations. That's not what it says. They sold their property and their possessions. Why? So they could share the money with those in need. There was this gap between those who had and those who had not. And they stepped across that gap. There was a need in the middle. And when they stepped into the need in the middle, they began to see Jesus in ways that they had not seen him before. And this is revolutionary stuff. This is they shared what they had. They literally sold their possessions. And I want to ask you, can you grab your wallet or your checkbook, or it might be like a debit card? Can you just get it out and put it in your hand? Because I want us to feel the weight of this passage. It's easy just to like skirt right over it, but it's just, they shared what they had. Now, what's interesting, back in the Gospels, Jesus says there is going to be a number one competitor for your heart. There is going to be a number one competitor for your attention, your affection, your allegiance. Jesus says, out of all the things in the world, there's lots of things competing for your affection, your allegiance, but the number one competitor, he said, you cannot serve two masters. It will either be God or what? Money. And actually, the word he uses in that passage is the word mammon. It's an Aramaic word, and it's actually capitalized. And so, see this wallet of mine right here? This is my George Costanza wallet. Some of you know what I'm talking about. I'm Dutch, so I have every frequent, buyer card in the world because I'm going to get the free coffee, man. Whatever it takes, right? What Jesus is saying is this is more than an object. Mammon is actually, it's a proper name. He's personifying money. In other words, I am mammon. Feed me. He's saying a wallet can be more than a wallet. It can actually be a temple. And I've worshiped here before. How about you? He said it's the number one competitor for our heart. And they do this revolutionary thing. It's like they just let it go. And I want us to have just a little practice of this. So what I want you to do is take your wallet, your checkbook, or whatever you've got, your debit card, and just hand it to the person next to you. Can you do that? Just slide it down. Go ahead. Just let it go. Give it to someone else. Can you do that? Okay, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to take an offering, my friends. And I want you to give like you've never given before. Like you've always wanted to give. Hurry, get your wallet back real quick. Get it back. Because it's fun to spend other people's money, isn't it? And what these early disciples lived like is that actually all the money was God's money. That it was all his. And that mammon was actually not going to call the shots. It's funny, mammon in the Jewish tradition is considered one of the 7 princes of hell. And they said, we're not going to let mammon call the shots. Only Jesus is worthy of that. And then there's more detail here in Acts chapter 4. Look at what it says. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own. How radical is that? But they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And now look for a cause and effect relationship in this next verse. Here's the cause. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all. And what happened? That there were no needy persons among them. Let's read that out loud. That there were no needy persons among them. Underline that. That there were no needy persons among them. They had learned to see Jesus in need. And they saw and experienced Jesus in meeting need in a way that was so amazing and breathtaking and transformative that they met the need to the point where there were no needy people among them. Imagine that. And this phrase, that there were no needy people among them, in the mind of a first century Jewish reader or listener, a bell would have went off. Alarm would have went ding, 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 ding. They went, oh, I recognize that. That there were no needy people among them. Ding, 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 ding. I know that phrase. You know, there's certain phrases in our culture, and immediately when this phrase is said, we'll kind of have this collective knowledge of, oh yeah, we all know that. And sometimes they're real surfacey, like marketing campaigns, right? Like if I go, bum, ba, bum, 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 what's next? I'm loving it, right? We know that one. You evil clown, Ronald, you're brainwashing us. Right? Or you remember some of the older marketing campaigns, like, where's the beef? If you don't know that one, ask an old person, they'll tell you about it. Or remember this one, what's up? I used to think it was cool to say that, how embarrassing, right? But then there's other phrases that really have like a lot of freight. They're weighty. Like if I take two numbers and juxtaposition them and say 9/11, it goes, And this was that kind of phrase. Ding, 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 ding. There are no needy people among them. Just, And what they would have thought of is this Deuteronomy. It's Deuteronomy. That's from Deuteronomy. And there's two books that Jesus quoted the most. One is Psalms, and the other one is Deuteronomy. It just shaped Jesus' worldview and his imagination. And here Luke pulls out this phrase, and he slips it in to describe the early church. And look at what it says, Deuteronomy 15:4. Let's read it out loud. There will be no needy persons among you, because the Lord is sure to bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. There will be no needy persons among you. Ding, 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 ding. And here's the context. God's people have just been delivered from Egypt. This is post-Exodus. And here's this group of former slaves, and he's giving them a new identity as his people. And he's painting this picture of what it is to be God's people and what it is he wants. And he's taking this group of ex-slaves that lived in this warring tribal culture, and he's trying to elevate them and show them a vision of true humanity, what it means to be truly alive and to bear the image of God. And what he's saying to them is, I don't want you to be some weird club of ex-slaves who just celebrate your personal freedom. We're free, we're free, we're free, we're awesome. God saved us, woohoo! No, he's saying, listen, I have blessed you, but so you can join me and be a blessing to all the peoples of the world. This isn't some kind of like simply one ethnic group kind of thing. I want you to join me in redeeming, restoring, and recreating the whole world. And you are my people. And I'm going to bless you, not so you can sit back fat and sassy in your lazy boy of blessing, so you can be a reservoir. No, I want you to be a river. And God calls them the light of the world. He says, my people will be the light of the world. And he says, you'll be a nation of priests. In other words, you will mediate my goodness, my kindness, my generosity, my mercy. And what's really powerful here is Luke then in the book of Acts is doing something very subversive. He's saying that dream God had for Israel as this redemptive covenant community, it's finally being realized in the church. We're that community where there's no needy people among us because of the goodness and generosity of God. Luke is saying, listen, we are the people who get it. We were slaves. We were enslaved to sin and death, and Jesus came and he liberated us. And we're not just going to do a little celebration of our personal freedom. We're here to be freedom bringers wherever we go, where we live, work, and play. And we're the ones who are in debt. I was spiritually bankrupt. There was no way I was going to be able to pay my personal debt of trillions. And so God came in Jesus, and he was infinitely wealthy, and he left his throne, and he literally became poor. Literally became a poor man. And then he took my poverty, my debt on him, and on the cross, he paid the debt. So it's Jubilee, my debt is paid. And if you've got like house debt and credit card debt and college debt, how good would it feel to just someone come up today and write a check and it's paid? That's nothing compared to the debt Jesus has paid for us. Nothing. And he's like, you're that people. And when you get that, what it does is it turns this clenched fist that wants to hang on to mammon. It starts to open up your hands. And he says, that's who the church is. And he goes all the way back to Deuteronomy where God is painting that picture. And what's interesting is the next part of Deuteronomy where it goes next. God begins to give very clear instructions to his people about, okay, who are the needy people? Because you know what? God knows we'll get confused about what need is because it becomes relativized to the people next to me. And I get confused about what need really is. Like when I was watching the playoffs in the World Series, I'm watching the game and I'm looking at Lorenzo and I'm like, man, that's a big guy, but he looks really small on my screen. This looks so tiny. That's just not right. And I'm having all this eye strain. I can't see it clearly. You know what I need? I need a bigger screen. That would be awesome. The whole wall, right? And it feels like I need that bigger screen, or I need you fill in the blank. And God wants us to have clarity on who are actually the needy people. And this is where the triangle comes in. This is where the lens is a triangle type lens. And we're going to look at him describe who are these needy people in Deuteronomy 24. So look for the triangle, see if you can find it. Who are the needy people? He says, do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you are slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I've commanded you to do this. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for who? The foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for who? The foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That's why I command you to do this. So there are three groups of people that God commands his people to watch out for. And God says, there is what I affectionately call a trifecta of the marginalized. The trifecta of the marginalized. And in your little triangle, you can put an M in the middle. And he talks about who are the needy people, and he clarifies over and over again. There are three groups, and you tell me who they are. Who is the first one? The foreigner, yes. And then who is next? The fatherless, and who is last? The widow. And over again, he says the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow. Care for the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow. And see, this is a lens. Glasses used to be mostly round, and now we have cool glasses like this. Here's what I want you to imagine. You've probably never seen a pair of glasses like this with triangular lenses or frames. And God is saying, I want you to put on these lenses and look to the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. And when you do, you will see me. And in fact, we actually end up seeing ourselves for who we are. The foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. So who are they? What do they look like, these marginalized people? Well, I'll tell you this, you don't have to go very far. But let me tell you a couple things. If you look at this trifecta of the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, I listed it in your notes. Look at it. It just comes up over and over and over again. In Exodus 22, Exodus 23, Leviticus 19, Leviticus 23, Deuteronomy 10, Deuteronomy 14, Deuteronomy 15, Deuteronomy 24, Deuteronomy 26, over. You can see it just occurs. The trifecta of the marginalized comes up over and over and over again. And if we move beyond the mention of these three specific groups to a more generalized concern for the poor, write this down. There are over 2,000 passages that highlight God's concern for the poor and the marginalized. And as this is repeated over and over and over again, what God is saying is this, okay? The purpose of influence is to speak up for those who have none. And the purpose of affluence is to share it with those who have none. That's the purpose of influence and affluence, is to share it with those who have none. And over again, God brings us back to this concern. That is the purpose. And everybody in this room, we've been given influence and affluence. And I understand, like the way things have been in the economy. I know it's starting to go up a little bit, but a lot of us are feeling more pressure than we've ever felt before. And when you look at the stats, like the median income of the average American worker hasn't really tracked with inflation. It's sort of been stagnant for a long time. And that means more people are working more hours and more people are working more than one job. And everybody who can work in a household feel like we need to work, and it creates this sense of pressure. And I get that and I respect that. But when we pull the lens back, we have to remember, if we're in this room, we're still among the wealthiest people who have ever lived. And God says there are people who are actually needy, and here's what they look like. It's the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. So what do they look like in our lives? We don't have to go actually very far. You don't have to go to another country. I think of Arlene, who lives across the street from us. And she's been like in a transitional care facility, and she just moved back into her home. And she's a widow. She's all alone. She's across the street. I think of another family just a few houses down, and it's a mom who just recently became a single mom. And she's got to figure out how to make all this work. They're actually very close to us. I think of 2,000 children that are in foster care, in this county, in this area. They're not very far away. It's the guy that you see with the "will work for food" sign. And it's kind of an uncomfortable moment, right? When you see that guy. You know what I'm talking about? Like there's a thing in me that's sort of like, don't make eye contact, don't make eye contact. You know what I'm saying? And when we see the marginalized, there's this sense of need that's so profound sometimes that it's overwhelming. And we don't want to press in because it threatens us and it's scary. And we feel so limited. I'm like, what can I do? I remember feeling this in a profound way. I was on a trip to Sudan, Africa, and I had been invited to train some pastors and church planners there. And many of you know, kind of in general, broad strokes, the history of Sudan. It's this civil war-torn country with unbelievable atrocities that have happened. And I was brought by our host to this refugee camp around the capital city of Khartoum. And these are all people that have been displaced from their homes. Like to a person, they've had family and friends murdered, raped, maimed. Their villages burned to the ground, destroyed by the war, and they just ran towards the capital city in hopes that there'd be some kind of help or resource. And now there's this sort of swirling eddy of hunger and disease and poverty around the city at the time. And when I saw it, it was like someone just punched me in the stomach. So overwhelming. And my host was taking me to meet some of the pastors and the church planners who were actually starting new faith communities in the refugee camp. How amazing is that? Living there as one among the refugees. And they took me to this one hut, and I'll never forget this experience. I bent over double to go into the hut. And when I did, I was hit by this wave, this stench of human excrement that was so strong, I literally started to vomit. I started to dry heave. And the suffering residents of this hut had the thoughtfulness to protect my dignity by acting like they hadn't seen me do that. So my greeting is to basically like dry heave at them. And then I look at this gentleman, and he's laying on a cot. His name is George. And that's George, and that's his brother Joseph. And their village was destroyed in the Civil War. Their family was murdered. And they ran to this refugee camp. And George, shortly thereafter, got some kind of disease, which at that point was still undiagnosed. As you can imagine, with millions of people coming, it's hard to maintain sanitation, healthcare, et cetera. And he, over the last 18 months, had been increasingly losing the use of the right side of his body. Until at this point, he was completely paralyzed. And he's on this mat, and they've cut a hole around his posterior, and he just lays there all day. And the excrement just falls out below, and there's flies flying everywhere. And as he's telling me this story, he broke down weeping 3 different times. And I'm just overwhelmed, paralyzed by the overwhelming sense of need and how small I am. And then he asked me for just one small thing, a very small intervention. He said, "Would you lay hands on me and pray for me?" And here's the thing I have to admit. I was moved with an overwhelming and abiding concern for myself. I'm ashamed to admit it. The first thing I thought of is, if I touch him, I wonder if I'll get what he has. And he asked again, would you lay your hand on me and pray for me? And I went over to his bed, and I placed my hand on him, but just barely. Not like Jesus, who would go to the leper and the untouchable and hold them and touch them and heal them, just barely. And I began to pray for him, and as I did, with his one good hand, George grabbed me. And when he grabbed me, I knew I was being held by the hand of the risen Savior. I knew that Jesus had grabbed my hand. And I was just undone in that moment. And I could hear Jesus say to me, not in an audible voice, but he said, will you not hold my hand? And I realized the person that I've been scraping my fingers on, communicating a lack of value and dignity, was actually Jesus. And the God that we serve, I want you to see what he says. He says, I'm a father to the fatherless. I'm a defender of the widows. And what I felt in that moment as my heart was broken was this overwhelming sense of love and compassion, of George's inestimable worth. And I felt this parental affection that was the heart of God for George as I began to grip his hand back and realizing if all I have to give is this prayer and a human touch, that's all Jesus is asking for me to give in this moment. Why would I withhold it when I can join him in being a defender of the widow and the orphan? And look at the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 25. He says, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least brothers of mine, you did for me. Circle that. When we go to the poor, we see and meet Jesus in a wonderful, mystical, and dare I say, sacramental way. Because there's so many things that happen when we move towards the poor. One of the things that we'll see is, you know what, we're actually poor. And one of the things we'll see is, guess what? The poor are actually rich in ways that the rich are poor. Hello? That everybody's rich, everybody's poor, that at the foot of the cross we all have equal values, that we're neighbors, we're friends, we're equals. And those illusions of all the caste system of society in the community of Jesus, they begin to degrade when we move towards the poor and they move towards us. And we find each other as equals. And we learn from one another. You know, the other thing that happens when you move towards the poor is we're told by our culture over and over again, all you are is you're a collection of appetites for money, pleasure, success, entertainment. They basically tell you you're a character on Sesame Street. Me see cookie, me want cookie, me take cookie. And when you go towards the poor, you know what? That cookie monster gets crucified. And that sense that I'm just a collection of appetites gets actually disintegrated. And you realize I'm actually here to be a blessing. I'm here to be a giver. I'm here to contribute. That's God's image stamped on me. And I want to say, as Michelle and I have had the privilege of moving into this community of faith, one of the things that drew us most to this community was your heart for the orphan and your heart for the poor. You know, last year we were here on the weekend where we had the Christmas trees up. And I remember we were sitting somewhere around here, and after that service, there was an invitation to go to those Christmas trees, and it was like the inmates were loose in the prison, man. People just went out, and there was like a massive humanity, and, you know, Belle and I were trying to get back there. It was like we were salmon swimming up, you know, with all the salmon, and I just thought, this is amazing. And then we began to find out more and more about how this is a community that literally day in and day out is feeding the hungry, caring for the orphan, caring for the widow, caring for the immigrant, both here in inner city KCK and in South Africa and India and Thailand and Laos. And you know what? You probably saw the Christmas trees on the way in. And this is the time of the year where, guess what? Last year, we bought Christmas presents for over 2,000 kids in foster care. How cool is that, right? And what do you say we do it again? You know? What do you say? When you go out there, you're going to see these little tags, and you can grab one. And each one of those is a kid that you're going to in the name of Jesus, the fatherless. And you notice some of them are gift cards, and sometimes it's like, well, it's not as fun. I want to get the gift that says go buy the, specific toy. But one of the reasons there's so many gift cards is because we've discovered our teams that are working with kids in foster care day in and day out. These kids, one of the parts of poverty is you feel like you don't have any choice. And they get these gift cards, and it's like, I'm empowered to choose. And you know what they found out? You know what a bunch of these kids do? They buy a gift for somebody else. You see how you see Jesus when you move towards the poor? How beautiful is that? So I'll encourage you guys, let's go for it. And some of you, there's this prompting where you're like, yeah, I want to do that. Is there anything else we want you to know? If you go to westsidefamilychurch.com, Seeing Jesus, there's a little form there that you can fill out. It'll take you literally 30 seconds. It doesn't commit you to anything except getting information. And it'll have just kind of this list of the scores of ways of easy access, easy entry, where you could move closer to the poor as an individual or as a family. And someone will ping you back this next week, and they'll say, hey, here's some more information. Again, doesn't commit you to show up anywhere. No one's going to come to your house, but you'll get more information about how you could move towards the poor. And why are we going to do that? Because here's why. The purpose of influence is to share with those who have none, and the purpose of affluence is to share with those who have none. And Jesus has done that for us, hasn't he? And we get the joy of doing that with others. So let's bow our heads. You can make this prayer your own. Lord, it wasn't just enough for you to care for the poor. You chose to become one of them by descending as you did. You didn't send a check, you sent yourself. So keep us, Lord. Free us from the fear and the selfish preoccupations that we can walk with you among the poor and the sick and the hurting. Lord, make us as a community a refuge for the poor. I pray we'll be known for that. That we would be a community that prepares a feast for the hungry. That we be a community that wipes away the tears of the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow. Even as you have sheltered us and you have fed us and you wiped away our tears. And Lord, make us one with the poor that we might see you. Help us to put on these triangle-shaped lenses this week. And all God's people say, amen. Hey, just a reminder, members from the prayer team will be up here at the edge of the stage. They'd love to pray with you. Okay, on your mark, get set, go. Go get those tags.